How people imagine that letting go must mean stepping back, hardening, withdrawing into some chilly corner of themselves, as though openness were dangerous, and the only sensible thing is to place a little frost between oneself and the world. But the frost, is just another mask of fear. It pretends to be strength, but it's really a shaking hand in a pocket, hoping no one notices. Letting go is altogether different. It isn't the art of becoming numb, it's the art of becoming transparent, letting life pass through without catching on the edges. Most people grip because they think life is a sort of slippery rope, and that if they stop holding tightly, they'll fall into some abyss. But the astonishing thing, the sort of cosmic joke, is that the abyss they fear is made entirely of their own imagining. It's a picture painted with trembling strokes, and because they stare at it long enough, they believe it's real. You've felt that, I'm sure. The way the mind insists, if I stop holding on, I won't be safe. And so the grip begins on people, on plans, on ideas of who you think you ought to be. But the grip becomes the tension, it becomes the ache. And eventually, you begin to suspect that the thing you're holding so tightly isn't pulling you forward at all, it's holding you back. Letting go isn't letting life escape you, it's letting life breathe. If you watch a tree, really watch it, you'll notice it never stiffens against the wind. A tree doesn't say, I must not bend, or I will lose my dignity. It simply sways. It moves with the invisible currents that shape it. And yet, despite all that yielding, it remains rooted, not cold, not aloof, just naturally itself. Human beings, though, often imagine that warmth depends on attachment, that if they loosen their grip, they'll stop caring. But caring is not the same as clinging. Caring is like the warmth of the sun. It radiates because it is, not because it holds. The trouble is that so many have been taught, perhaps quietly, perhaps by example, that openness invites harm. And so they build these subtle armors, little habits of distance, a certain tone in the voice, a shrug, a way of stepping back just enough that no one can lean too close. It feels safe, but it numbs the fingertips. You stop feeling the texture of the world. And yet, you can sense there's something inside you, a wish, a longing to be touched by life again, to feel the wind without flinching, to meet another pair of eyes without checking for danger. That longing is the soft center you've been trying so hard to protect. It isn't made to be armored, it's made to be seen. Letting go is not losing that soft center, it's trusting it. Imagine a river. People often believe they must swim upstream to keep control, because downstream, well, who knows what's there. But the river isn't an enemy. It's the very movement of existence itself. When you stop fighting it, you discover that it carries you with an intelligence far older than your effort. It knows where to turn, how to curve, where to slow and deepen. Now, there's a quiet misunderstanding that letting go means apathy, a kind of blankness, a shrug of the shoulders. But apathy is the refusal to feel. Letting go is feeling so completely that you don't need to hold. You don't cling to a sunset to enjoy it. You don't restrict a bird's flight to admire it. There's a love in seeing things come and go freely, a warmth that doesn't depend on possession. You see, becoming cold is simply another strategy of control. It says, if I do not care, nothing can hurt me. But that is the same fear in a quieter costume. You might become untouchable, but you also become untouched. And that, in the end, is its own kind of wound. Life moves with a rhythm, like breath. Inhale, exhale, gather, release. When you try to inhale and never exhale, you suffocate. When you try to exhale without ever receiving, you faint. Letting go is the exhale that makes room for the next breath, and warmth comes from breathing fully. There's an art to this that isn't learned by striving. It's felt in the spaces between experiences. When a conversation ends and you don't chase it. When someone leaves and you don't close the door behind them with resentment. When a moment passes and you don't demand that it return. These small surrenders create a kind of inner spaciousness, a room in which life can dance without bumping into your defenses. Think of the sky. Clouds drift across it constantly. Shapes, moods, weather. The sky doesn't cling to any of them, yet it holds them all, not coldly, but openly. Its vastness isn't aloofness, it's freedom. When you begin to sense that same open sky within yourself, you no longer fear that letting go will empty you. You realize it creates the space where warmth can flow. The heart doesn't warm by gripping, it warms by listening, by allowing, by being honest with itself. There's a peculiar thing that happens when you stop trying to manage everything. Feelings move through you more quickly. Sadness comes, and instead of sticking, it dissolves. Joy arises, sparkles for a moment, and moves on without loss. You discover that everything is fluid, and you are the space in which it moves. And gradually, a kind of gentleness appears. Not a softness of weakness, but a softness of understanding. You see that everyone is carrying their own invisible tensions, their own little knots of fear. And your letting go becomes an invitation for them to loosen as well. Warmth spreads not by force, but by example. You let go not to push life away, but to let life in. The paradox, always the paradox, is that when you loosen your grasp, you actually feel more connected. Because connection isn't made in the grip, it's made in the meeting. In the moment where you and the world touch without trying to own or control each other. And so letting go becomes a kind of dance. You move, life moves, and neither step on the other's toes. You find a rhythm that feels like truth. You feel yourself as part of something wider than your plans, softer than your fears, more alive than your strategies. If you listen closely, there is a moment, a very quiet one, where letting go feels like falling upward, a release into something that has been holding you all along. And perhaps that's the secret. You were never meant to grip life to stay afloat. You were meant to float because you are buoyant by nature. Warmth rises when fear sinks. And when the fear dissolves, even slightly, you begin to feel the natural lift of being alive. Letting go is simply remembering that. And it brings you here, to this very moment, where the breath settles of its own accord, and you begin to notice that nothing in this moment is asking you to be rigid. The room doesn't demand it, the air doesn't. Even your thoughts, when left alone, soften around the edges. It's only the habit of holding on that tightens things, like a fist long after the object has been dropped. And once you see that, even faintly, you begin to loosen for no grand reason at all. Not to achieve serenity or to impress life with your spiritual posture, but simply because it's more natural to unclench. Letting go, you discover, is not an act of will. It's the stopping of an act of will. It's the moment a bird realizes the cage door has been open for ages, and the only thing keeping it inside was the memory of bars. Fear leaves behind these ghost structures, and we keep bumping into them, bruising ourselves on something no longer there. But when you pause, when you really look, you see the empty doorway, and a kind of quiet laughter arises, not loud, not triumphant, just the soft chuckle of someone waking from a long and overly serious dream. Now, warmth comes back in a peculiar way, not as a rush, but as a thaw, a slow melting of the instinct to shield your heart. You feel it first in small encounters, a smile you return without hesitation, a moment of stillness in which you don't reach for distraction, a tenderness toward yourself when you falter. These are signs that life is seeping in again, like light through curtains. You realize that letting go isn't something you do to life. It's something you do within yourself, for yourself, and life responds accordingly. People sense it. They feel that you are not holding them in a grip of expectation or fear, and in that absence they relax. They meet you with the same ease you offer. Warmth is contagious in that way. Not forced warmth, not the performance of kindness, but the natural warmth that rises when you're not bracing. When a leaf falls from a tree, it doesn't become cold on the way down. It spins, flutters, and sometimes lands right in the palm of someone who pauses long enough to notice it. Letting go is like that fall, a release that is also a dance. And the dance is what keeps it alive, even in dissent. But you see, the mind is clever. It will say, if I let go, people may leave, things may change, I may feel pain again. And yes, all of that is true. But trying to prevent movement doesn't prevent pain. It prevents life. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is simply the sensation of growth when we've resisted it for too long. It's the stiffness in a muscle that hasn't been stretched. The ache is not punishment, it's invitation. There is a moment, if you sit with yourself long enough, where you realize that your warmth never depended on anything outside you. It was only obscured by the tension of trying to hold the world still. Imagine a pond on a windy day. The surface is disturbed, rippling with every passing gust. But the depth of the pond remains untouched. Still, clear, reflective. Letting go is sinking into that depth. Not to escape the surface, but to understand that you are not limited to it. Once you sense that inner depth, you find that you can meet the wind without becoming scattered. You can open your hand without feeling empty. You can release without feeling lost. The warmth you feared losing is actually born from that depth. It's the glow of being in accord with yourself. And this is what keeps you from becoming cold. You're no longer letting go to get away. You're letting go to be here, fully, honestly, without the constant negotiation with life. There's a lightness that comes then, a way of laughing more readily, of forgiving small things before they even settle in the mind. You move differently. You speak from a place less entangled. People notice not because you preach, but because your presence feels like a gentle clearing in the woods where someone can sit without needing to defend themselves. Letting go reveals warmth because warmth was what you were made of before fear taught you to harden. And the most beautiful thing is that nothing is lost. What is real in your life, the connections, the insights, the moments of truth, they remain, not because you hold them tightly, but because they fit naturally in the open space of your being. You become like a shoreline. The waves arrive and depart, but the shore does not vanish with each withdrawal. It simply receives, releases, and remains. And in that rhythm, you find something marvelous. That openness doesn't weaken you. It strengthens you with a quiet, unshakable resilience. A resilience that doesn't need armor, because it doesn't wage war with experience. It moves with experience. You begin to see that letting go is really a kind of listening to the current of life as it moves through each moment. Listening to the truth that arises when you are not forcing the world into shapes that suit your fears. And when you listen like that, openly, gently, the world starts to whisper back. In the rustle of leaves, in the hush of evening, in the soft way someone says your name. Everything becomes a reminder that you are part of a vast unfolding, not separate from it, not threatened by it. There comes a day, or perhaps just a moment that feels like a day, when you realize you no longer fear the feeling of release. You no longer interpret it as loss. It becomes instead a kind of inner freedom, like unclasping a tight necklace. When a person begins to notice what others overlook, there is at first a kind of thrill. It feels like lifting a veil, like peering behind the stage into the machinery of the play. Suddenly, what seems solid and unquestionable is revealed to be shifting, relative, even dreamlike. Yet along with this exhilaration comes a quieter, heavier sensation, the realization that most people do not see and perhaps do not wish to. What you thought would be a shared discovery is instead a private burden. You may try to explain, to put into words, the insight that has dawned on you, but the language falls flat, and those you speak to blink as though you are speaking in riddles. It is as if you are pointing at the moon and they only see your finger. The danger of seeing what others do not is not so much that you are wrong, but that you are alone. Human beings are social creatures, and belonging is as essential as food or air. When the crowd looks one way and you are gazing in another, there is a current of unease. To be the only one who notices the emperor's new clothes is not merely a story about honesty, but about the peril of being out of step with the group. We draw safety from consensus, from the feeling that if everyone agrees, then it must be so. But the moment you glimpse something that contradicts the agreement, you find yourself at odds with the very fabric that holds people together. There is also the danger of arrogance. To see what others do not can feed the subtle belief that you are superior, that your vision grants you a special status. But this quickly becomes its own trap. For the moment you define yourself as the enlightened one, you have merely built a new wall between you and the rest. What began as a discovery dissolves into pride, and pride always isolates. The vision itself may have been clear, but the self that grasps it turns cloudy. In trying to hold on, you lose the very freedom you had glimpsed. Think of a child who suddenly understands a joke before anyone else in the room. They laugh aloud, expecting others to join, but the silence that greets them feels cold. The joy of recognition becomes embarrassment. In that instant, they learn that timing matters, that understanding out of sync with others can sting. Adults feel the same sting, though it wears the clothing of philosophy, religion, or insight. To wake up while others are still dreaming is not always a triumph. It can be profoundly lonely. And yet, what is it that we see when we see differently? Often, it is the fleeting nature of things, the fragility of what others call permanent. We notice that money, power, reputation, all the idols of society are as insubstantial as smoke. We notice that the roles people cling to with such intensity are costumes that will be dropped sooner or later. We notice that beneath the noise of ambition and fear, there is a silence, an openness that does not strive at all. To see this is to see through the game. And once you see through it, you cannot play it with the same seriousness again. But the others continue, earnest and intent, and your laughter sounds to them like madness. This is why so many teachers, poets, and mystics have spoken of exile. Not always a literal banishment, but a subtle one, the sense of not fitting, of being slightly out of tune with the orchestra around you. The music plays, but you hear a dissonance others ignore. And when you point it out, the players insist that everything is fine. You begin to wonder if you are the one out of tune, if the clarity that once felt liberating is instead a form of delusion. The mind wavers between certainty and doubt, and both carry their own weight. But consider that every vision, every new perception in history has always begun with someone who saw differently. The danger of seeing what others do not is real, but it is also the seed of transformation. Still, in the beginning, it feels like standing at the edge of a vast forest while the village insists the world ends at the meadow. You want to describe the trees, the shadows, the depth of the woods, but to them it sounds like fantasy. And so you stand with one foot in the known and one foot in the unknown, belonging fully to neither. This is the tension. To carry in your heart a glimpse of something wider, something truer, while moving among people who are content with their smaller maps. The danger is not only that they will misunderstand you, but that you will begin to misunderstand yourself, to doubt the vision, or to inflate it, or to guard it so fiercely that it becomes brittle. You may try to smother it, to return to ordinary sleep. But the dream of the world never fits again once you have seen beyond it. You may try to proclaim it loudly, but the louder you shout, the less others hear. And so you walk with it quietly, unsure whether it is a blessing or a curse. There is also fear, the kind of fear that whispers, if I let go of what the crowd believes, where will I belong? For belief is not merely a private act. It is the glue of societies, families, friendships. To question it is to risk unraveling bonds that feel necessary for survival. And so, many who see hesitate to admit it, even to themselves. They carry the vision like a secret flame, shielding it from the wind of public opinion, never certain if they're protecting it or themselves. The danger is isolation, the danger is misunderstanding, the danger is pride, but beneath all of these, the deepest danger is that you will forget how to laugh. To take your vision so gravely that you become rigid, cut off not only from others but from the very life that showed you this glimpse in the first place. This is why many who awaken fall into despair before they find peace. It is the dark night of seeing what others do not. It is not enough to notice the illusion. The greater challenge is to live with that noticing, to carry it gracefully among those who are still entranced. To be in the world but not of it, as some traditions put it, is not a slogan but a daily balancing act. And until that balance is found, the gift of sight can feel like a curse. For to walk in two worlds at once is never comfortable. And yet, what seems at first to be a curse reveals itself, with time, to be the very doorway into freedom. The loneliness of seeing differently is only sharp when you imagine that you must convince others that your vision has to be validated by the crowd to be real. The moment you let go of that demand, the burden softens. For truth is not dependent upon recognition, and awareness does not become less itself because it is unnoticed. The sky does not stop being the sky when clouds cover it, and the ocean does not cease to be the ocean when no ship sails its surface. In the same way, what you have seen remains what it is, whether or not another agrees. The resolution, then, is not to return to sleep, nor to shout at the dreamers, but to walk lightly, to live what you have seen without needing applause. When you understand that the world is play, that life is a dance, you can smile at the earnestness of those still caught in the game without condemning them. You see that their seriousness, their striving and fear are also part of the whole, just as your laughter and insight are. The one who sees is not apart from those who do not see, but an expression of the same reality, taking on a different mask. This changes the flavor of your vision. What was once heavy becomes light. The awareness that isolated you begins to connect you more deeply. For now you recognize that those who do not see are not wrong. They are simply playing another part in the cosmic performance. Without them, there would be no contrast, no stage upon which your own role makes sense. Just as music requires silence, just as light requires shadow, the clarity of sight requires the backdrop of blindness. The difference does not divide, but completes. Think of the flower blooming in a field. It does not demand that the grasses beside it also bloom in the same way. It simply unfolds, radiates, expresses its nature. And in doing so, it contributes to the whole field, not by making others like itself, but by being precisely what it island. So too with the one who sees. The task is not to reform the world into your vision, but to live your vision as naturally as the flower blooms. In that authenticity, you become nourishment for others, whether they realize it or not. And sometimes, without effort, others notice. A word you speak casually, a silence you embody, a lightness in your presence, these become sparks that awaken curiosity. But even if they do not, nothing is lost. The play continues, the dance unfolds, and your part is no less vital because it is unrecognized. The true gift of seeing differently is not superiority, but freedom. You are no longer bound by the unquestioned rules of the game. You may play them if you wish, for the joy of it, but you are not deceived into thinking the outcome is final. You may step back when the game grows tedious, laugh when others are grim, and rest when others are restless. This freedom is subtle, but it changes everything. For when you are no longer driven by the compulsion to prove, you discover a gentleness that can embrace all. Even the danger that once haunted you of being alone, of being misunderstood, becomes part of the comedy. You see that every prophet, every poet, every thinker who glimpsed beyond the ordinary, faced the same fate. And yet their words carried through time, not because they fought the blindness of their contemporaries, but because they simply sang their song. And so the invitation is not to fight, but to sing. To let your vision express itself in whatever way it wishes, whether in speech, in silence, in action, or in stillness. In this way, the danger dissolves into play. The one who sees and the one who does not are both the universe in disguise. There is no real separation, no real opposition. What looked like alienation is in fact another face of intimacy. For to be the only one awake in a room of sleepers is still to share the same room, the same night, the same dream. The laughter you carry, though quiet, is still part of the whole sound. And so, you may rest, you may see without clinging, you may walk without boasting, you may love without demanding agreement. The vision you carry is not a weapon, not a burden, not even a possession. It is simply the light by which you move, as natural as breathing, as effortless as being. And in time, you may even forget that you are different, for the difference no longer defines you. You are not the seer against the blind, but the whole itself, playing at many levels of awareness, all equally necessary, all equally divine. And perhaps the most subtle shift of all is this. What once seemed like your private vision begins to reveal itself as nothing personal at all. The sight that you carry is not your possession, not an achievement of the mind, but the universe opening its own eyes through you. In that moment, even the idea of seeing differently softens, for you recognize that all seeing belongs to the same awareness. The distinction between those who see and those who do not becomes less sharp, more playful, like the changing of roles in a play where each actor takes their turn under the spotlight. Consider the ocean again, with its endless waves. Some waves rise high, glistening in the sun, while others barely ripple upon the surface. To the eye, they seem distinct, greater or lesser, bold or quiet. But to the ocean, they are one movement, inseparable. The wave that sees its own crest does not look down upon the trough. It knows both of the same water. So it is with the one who glimpses beyond the usual illusion. Not superior, not apart, but simply aware that all are movements of the same depth. This awareness gives birth to compassion. For when you no longer feel compelled to drag others into your vision, you can love them as they are. The seriousness with which they chase their ambitions, the fears they nurse, the dramas they play out, all of it becomes endearing, as though you were watching children at play. Not condescension, but tenderness, because you recognize yourself in them. You too once played those games in full sincerity, and perhaps you still do, for even the awakened must sometimes forget in order to live. Forgetting is part of remembering, blindness is part of sight, and so you walk more gently, you listen more patiently, you smile more easily. The vision you carry ceases to be a sharp edge dividing you from others, and becomes instead a soft light by which you move among them. You are not required to convince or convert, only to live in such a way that your very being whispers of a freedom beyond striving. That whisper, whether heard or not, belongs to the music of the whole. Notice also how the danger dissolves when you see that what you feared isolation was never truly there. The feeling of being apart arose only when you believed that awareness belonged to you, that you were a solitary flame among darkness. But the flame was never yours. It is the fire of existence itself, and it burns in every heart, whether seen or unseen. You cannot be apart from it, any more than a drop of water can fall outside the sea. The very sense of separation was part of the illusion you were meant to see through. And what then remains? A deep ease, a kind of trust. You do not need to calculate how others will respond, or whether your insight will be accepted. You simply live, and in that living the truth finds its own expression. Sometimes it will flower visibly, sometimes it will lie hidden beneath the soil, but the life of it continues. regardless. You no longer demand outcomes because you no longer confuse outcomes with reality. Reality is here already, shimmering in each moment, and you are not apart from it. This is why many who see differently eventually become playful again. They laugh more, they sing, they enjoy the simple things. For when the burden of proving and defending falls away, what remains is the joy of being, and that joy is contagious in ways words never are. People may not understand your philosophy, but they feel your presence. They may not follow your reasoning, but they sense your ease, and in time, that ease does more than any argument could. So perhaps the true resolution is not to stand above or apart, but to rejoin the play consciously, to move among others not as a stranger, but as a companion who knows the dream is a dream and still delights in its colors. To take part in the laughter and the tears, not because you are deceived, but because you recognize them as the texture of the whole. In this way, seeing what others do not ceases to be a danger at all. It becomes a gift, not only to you, but to everyone around you, even if they never realize it. And as the words slow and the reflection settles, perhaps you can sense the spaciousness in which all of this unfolds. The danger, the vision, the loneliness, the joy, all of it rising and falling, like breath, like waves, like the endless turning of the earth. To see is simply to notice this movement. To live is to be this movement, and to rest is to allow it all, without resistance, without demand, without fear.
Have you ever had one of those moments where everything seemed to go wrong at once? Your morning coffee spills, you miss the bus, someone says something that cuts just a little too deep, and by the end of the day you're left wondering, what is going on? We tend to brush these things off as bad luck, as random chaos in an indifferent universe. But what if I told you that these moments, these patterns, these seemingly accidental collisions of circumstance are not random at all? What if the universe has been trying to get your attention and you've been too busy, too distracted, too caught up in the noise to notice? Now, before you think I'm suggesting some cosmic postman is delivering little warning notes to your doorstep, let me clarify. The universe doesn't work with telegrams or smoke signals. It speaks in the language of pattern, of rhythm, of synchronicity. It speaks through the very fabric of your experience. And when you're heading in a direction that's out of tune with the fundamental nature of things, when you're pushing against the current rather than flowing with it, the universe has ways of getting your attention. Think about it this way. If you were walking toward the edge of a cliff, wouldn't you want someone to tap you on the shoulder? The universe is always tapping. The question is whether you're listening. Let's talk about what these signs actually look like. Because I think most of us, when we hear the word sign, imagine something dramatic. A burning bush, a voice from the heavens, a lightning bolt spelling out your name. But the universe is far more subtle than that. It whispers before it shouts. It nudges before it pushes. And if you ignore the whispers long enough, well, then you might find yourself face down in the mud, wondering how you got there. The first sign is resistance. Persistent, grinding, exhausting resistance. You wake up every morning with a sense of dread about the day ahead. Your work feels like pushing a boulder uphill. Your relationships feel strained, forced, like wearing shoes that are 2 sizes too small. Everything requires tremendous effort, and nothing seems to flow naturally. This is not life being difficult for the sake of difficulty. This is the universe telling you that you're swimming against the current. You're trying to force something that doesn't want to be forced. You're clinging to a path that isn't yours to walk. The river wants to carry you in a certain direction, but you're gripping the rocks on the shore, insisting that you know better. Here's the thing. Life is supposed to have a certain ease to it. Not ease in the sense that everything is comfortable and nothing challenges you, but ease in the sense that when you're moving in harmony with your nature, with the way things actually work, there's a flow. Things open up. Doors appear. Opportunities present themselves. It's like sailing with the wind rather than against it. But when you're out of alignment, when you're forcing yourself to be someone you're not, or chasing something that was never meant for you, the universe puts obstacles in your path, not to punish you, but to redirect you, to get you to stop and ask, wait, why is this so hard? Why does this feel so wrong? The second sign is repetition. The same problems keep showing up in different disguises. You leave one job because of a difficult boss, only to find the exact same personality at the next company. You end a relationship because your partner wouldn't listen to you. And somehow your next relationship has the same issue. You move to a new city to escape your problems, only to discover that you packed them in your suitcase and brought them along. This is not coincidence. This is not bad luck. This is the universe holding up a mirror. It's saying, look, here's the pattern. Here's the thing you need to see about yourself. Here's the lesson you keep refusing to learn. The universe is remarkably patient, but it's also remarkably persistent. If there's something you need to understand, something you need to change, it will keep presenting you with the same situation over and over again until you finally get it. It's like being stuck on the same level of a game because you haven't learned the skill you need to progress. And the interesting thing is, the moment you actually learn the lesson, the moment you genuinely shift something inside yourself, the pattern disappears. Suddenly those difficult people stop appearing in your life. Those situations that used to trigger you don't bother you anymore. Not because the world changed, but because you changed. You learned what you needed to learn, and the universe said, all right, let's move on to the next chapter. The third sign is exhaustion. Not the kind of tired you feel after a good day's work. Not the pleasant fatigue of having used your body and mind fully, but a bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that no amount of sleep seems to cure. You wake up tired, you go to bed tired, everything feels heavy. This is your system telling you that something is fundamentally wrong. You're living in a way that drains you rather than sustains you. You're giving your energy to things that don't deserve it. You're maintaining a version of yourself that requires constant effort to uphold. Think about it. A tree doesn't get exhausted from being a tree. A bird doesn't tire itself out by being a bird. They simply are what they are, and in being what they are, they fulfill their nature effortlessly. But we humans have this peculiar habit of trying to be something we're not. We create elaborate personas, we maintain complicated lies, we twist ourselves into shapes that please others while betraying ourselves. And this requires enormous energy. When the universe sends you exhaustion, it's saying, stop, rest, reconsider. The way you're living is not sustainable. Something has to change. The fourth sign is disconnection. You feel increasingly isolated from the people around you. Conversations feel hollow. Your relationships lack depth. You go through the motions of social interaction, but there's no real connection, no genuine presence. You're there, but you're not really there. This happens when you've wandered too far from your authentic self. When you're wearing a mask for so long that you've forgotten what your real face looks like. People can sense this, even if they can't articulate it. There's something missing in your presence, something essential. And so genuine connection becomes impossible. Because connection requires vulnerability, authenticity, truth. The universe is fundamentally relational. Everything exists in relationship to everything else. The wave exists because of the ocean. The leaf exists because of the tree. You exist because of this vast web of relationships that stretches out in all directions. When you feel disconnected, It's a sign that you've forgotten this. You've started believing in your own separate existence, your own isolated self. And this belief is making you miserable. The fifth sign is chaos. Things keep breaking down. Your car stops working. Your computer crashes. Your plans fall apart at the last minute. One thing after another goes wrong, and you feel like you're constantly putting out fires. Now, sometimes things just break. That's the nature of the material world. But when you're experiencing a pattern of breakdown, when it feels like the universe is dismantling your carefully constructed life, piece by piece, pay attention. This is often the universe clearing away what no longer serves you. It's making space for something new. We cling so tightly to our structures, our plans, our ideas of how things should be, and sometimes the only way for something better to enter is for the old to fall apart. The farmer doesn't plant new seeds in a field that's already full of crops. First, there must be clearing. First, there must be space. The breakdown is not the problem. The breakdown is the preparation. The sixth sign is physical symptoms. Your body starts speaking up. Headaches, stomach problems, muscle tension that won't release. Your body is wise, much wiser than your thinking mind. It knows when something is wrong, long before your thoughts catch up. And when it can't get your attention any other way, it starts sending pain signals. Pain is not your enemy. Pain is information. It's your body's way of saying, hey, something needs to change here. We can't keep going like this. When you ignore the whispers, the body starts to shout. And if you ignore the shouting, well, then you might find yourself flat on your back, with no choice but to listen. The seventh sign is synchronicity. Strange coincidences start happening. You think of someone, and they call. You need information, and a book falls off the shelf right in front of you. You meet exactly the right person, at exactly the right moment. These moments of meaningful coincidence are like breadcrumbs, the universe leaving you a trail to follow. Carl Jung, that great explorer of the mind, spoke about synchronicity as evidence that there's more going on than we typically acknowledge. That beneath the surface chaos of life, there's a pattern, an order, a meaning. When synchronicities increase, it often means you're at a crossroads. The universe is trying to guide you, trying to show you which way to turn. But here's the crucial thing. These signs are not omens of doom. They're not the universe being cruel or punishing you. They're course corrections. They're love letters, written in the language of reality. The universe is not trying to hurt you. It's trying to wake you up. Think about a fever. When you have an infection, your body raises its temperature. This doesn't feel good. It's uncomfortable, sometimes even painful. But the fever is not the problem. The fever is the solution. It's your body's way of fighting off what doesn't belong. In the same way, these signs, these disruptions, these uncomfortable moments are not the problem. They're your life's immune system activating. Something toxic has entered, something that doesn't belong, and your system is working to eliminate it. Right. The question is, what do you do when you notice these signs? Because noticing is only the first step. You could notice them and then promptly ignore them, which is what most people do. We're remarkably good at seeing what we don't want to see, and then pretending we didn't see it. The response required is not dramatic action. It's not about quitting your job tomorrow, or ending your marriage, or selling all your possessions and moving to a monastery. Those might be the right moves for some people in some situations, but dramatic external changes, without internal understanding, usually just create more problems. The response required is stillness. Stop. Be quiet. Listen. The universe is speaking, but you have to create space to hear it. You have to turn down the volume on all the noise, all the constant chatter, all the opinions and expectations and demands that fill your head from morning to night. Sit with yourself. Not with your phone, not with a book, not with any distraction. Just sit And in that sitting, ask yourself honestly, what am I being told here? What am I refusing to see? What am I clinging to that needs to be released? The answers won't come as words. They'll come as knowing, as recognition, as a feeling of yes, that's it. Your body will relax slightly. Something that was tight will loosen. This is the sign that you've touched truth. And then, once you've heard the message, once you've understood what's being asked of you, the work is simple but not easy. You have to act on what you know. You have to make the change, even when it's uncomfortable, even when people don't understand, even when you're not sure how it will all work out. This is where most people get stuck. They receive the message, they understand what needs to happen, and then they do nothing. They go back to their old patterns, their old ways, their comfortable misery. And so the signs must get louder, the whispers become shouts, the nudges become shoves, but it doesn't have to be this way. You can choose to listen to the whispers. You can choose to respond when the universe taps gently on your shoulder, rather than waiting for it to knock you flat. Because here's what I want you to understand. The universe is not separate from you. You are not a tiny, isolated self, navigating a hostile cosmos. You are the universe experiencing itself in human form. When the universe warns you, it's you warning yourself. Your deeper wisdom, your connection to something larger than your small ego self, is trying to get through to your conscious awareness. So these signs, these warnings, they're not coming from outside. They're bubbling up from inside. From that place in you that knows, that's always known, what's true and what's false, what serves life and what doesn't. The question becomes, are you willing to trust yourself? Are you willing to trust the deeper knowing, even when it contradicts what your thinking mind insists is true? Are you willing to follow where life wants to take you, even when it means letting go of what you thought you wanted? This is the great adventure of being human. Not knowing where you're going, but trusting the process anyway. Not clinging to a fixed path, but being willing to be surprised, to be redirected, to be shown something you never imagined. The signs are there. They've always been there. The universe has been speaking to you in 1,000 different ways since the day you were born. The only question is whether you're finally ready to listen. Because once you start listening, once you start responding, once you start living in alignment with what's true rather than what's comfortable or expected or safe, everything changes. Not necessarily in the ways you imagine, but in ways that matter far more deeply. You stop fighting. You stop forcing. You stop exhausting yourself, trying to swim against the current. And instead, you let the river carry you. You let life live itself through you. You become like water, flowing around obstacles rather than crashing against them. Always moving, always changing, always finding the path of least resistance. This is what the universe has been trying to tell you all along. Stop resisting. Stop clinging. Stop pretending. Just be what you are, where you are with what you have. And trust that this is exactly where you need to be, learning exactly what you need to learn, becoming exactly who you're meant to become. The signs are not threats, they're invitations. The universe is not warning you away from danger, it's calling you toward your true life. The question is, will you answer?
Every moment spent chasing becomes a moment unseen, unlived, unappreciated. But when you realize that this very moment, this breath, this heartbeat, is the only enough that ever existed, something inside you softens. You no longer fight the flow. You start to dance with it. The meaning of money is in its movement. It is not meant to be hoarded, but circulated. It is energy in motion. And when you let it move, it brings life. When you freeze it, it begins to die. The same is true for joy, for love, for creativity. These things only remain alive when shared. That is why generosity has always been the mark of a truly wealthy spirit. Because generosity is not about giving away money, It is about releasing attachment. It is saying, I trust life enough to let this go. And the universe, being an echo of that same trust, often responds in kind. Real wealth does not come from possessing more, but from needing less. You become infinitely rich the moment you stop trying to compensate for your sense of lack. You realize that all this time, you were never chasing money, you were chasing yourself. You were searching for the feeling of being enough. And the moment you recognize that you already are, the chase ends. This does not mean you abandon ambition or stop working. It simply means you stop confusing effort with worth. You work not to become something, but to express what you already are. That shift, subtle as it seems, transforms everything. Suddenly, your actions feel lighter. You stop competing and start creating. You stop worrying about outcomes because you understand that what truly matters was never at stake. The real purpose of money is play, to facilitate exchange, creativity, and connection, not to define identity. When you begin to treat it as play, you participate in the great rhythm of life without losing yourself in it. You can work hard, earn much, even enjoy luxury, but you no longer confuse the mask for the face. Look around the world and you will notice that the happiest people are not necessarily those who have the most, but those who are most alive. They use money like musicians use notes, as a means of expression, not measurement. They can laugh at losses, smile through uncertainty, and still trust the unfolding of things. You may not control every rise and fall of fortune, but you can always control your relationship to it. You can choose to see money as movement rather than meaning. You can choose to treat wealth as a guest rather than a god. The moment you stop believing that happiness lies somewhere beyond the next financial milestone, you begin to wake up. You realize that the true treasure of life is not stored in banks, but in awareness, in the ability to see beauty in what is already here. Imagine living from that space. You still earn, still plan, still invest, but you no longer suffer through it. You no longer chase freedom, you express it. Because the free person is not one who has escaped the system, but one who no longer believes it defines them. Wealth and freedom are not opposites. They only appear that way when you forget who you are. When you remember, everything becomes simple. You earn when you need to, you rest when you can, and you allow life to unfold in its rhythm. And then, quite mysteriously, abundance finds its way back to you. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped blocking it. You stopped clutching at life and started trusting it. The fool chases freedom through control. The wise simply realize that control was never needed. And in that realization, you discover the most profound truth of all. You were never meant to be rich. You were meant to be free. They guide your choices, shape your dreams, and limit your joy. But fear is not truth. It is imagination without awareness. The mind projects its doubts into the future, forgetting that the present moment contains no threat. When you bring awareness back to now, fear dissolves like mist in sunlight. And finally, there is the place of achievement, the grand illusion that you must earn your right to exist. From childhood, you were taught that success is the price of worthiness. You were told that meaning is found in doing more, having more, becoming more, but this endless striving leaves you exhausted and hollow. For every mountain you climb, another appears. Every goal achieved brings only temporary satisfaction before the next desire takes its place. You cannot reach peace through achievement because peace was never missing. It was simply forgotten beneath the noise of becoming. When you live in these places long enough, you begin to forget that they are not who you are. You start to believe that comparison, control, and fear are the normal conditions of life. You even take pride in your suffering, calling it ambition or discipline. But there comes a moment, sometimes in exhaustion, sometimes in silence, when something within you whispers, There must be more than this. That whisper is the beginning of awakening. It is the voice of the true self calling you home. The journey back to your real nature does not begin by running from these places, but by seeing them clearly. Seeing the illusion is already freedom from it. The one who observes comparison is not comparing. The one who sees fear is not afraid. The awareness that witnesses the storm is not the storm itself. This is the essence of awakening. Not to become something new, but to remember what was never lost. As long as you identify with what changes, you will suffer with every change. But when you rest as the awareness behind it, you find a peace that cannot be shaken. The world continues to move. The body continues to age. The stories continue to unfold. Yet there is a stillness that remains untouched. That stillness is your true nature. It is not a belief or a philosophy. It is the very ground of your being. And when you begin to live from that awareness, something extraordinary happens. The comparisons lose their power. The fears lose their grip. The noise of the world softens into background music. You move through life not as someone trying to win, but as someone who has already arrived. You act, but without anxiety. You care, but without attachment. You love, but without possession. This is what it means to remember yourself. Most people will never take that step. They will continue to chase and collect and compare until their final breath. But you, if you are listening closely, may already sense that another way exists. Not a path that you must find, but one that reveals itself when you stop running. The moment you stop trying to become, you return to being. And there, in that simple presence, you rediscover the truth you had been searching for in every corner of the world. Your true self was never hidden. It was only overlooked. Like the silence behind every sound, it was there all along, waiting for you to remember. There comes a time when you grow tired of your own struggle, not because you've given up, but because you've finally seen through the illusion that there was ever something to win. You begin to notice that every chase ends in the same place. Every success fades into the next desire, and every fear eventually dissolves into the air it came from. And in that quiet realization, something begins to awaken. You start to sense that freedom is not a matter of fixing life, but of seeing it clearly. When you see clearly, you no longer need to escape the world. You simply stop mistaking the noise for yourself. The mind will still produce thoughts, emotions will still rise and fall, but the difference is that you no longer identify with them. You begin to live from a deeper stillness, an inner clarity that watches the play of life without being carried away by it. Most people believe awakening is about adding something more knowledge, more practice, more light, but true awakening is the opposite. It is a gentle undoing, a falling away of everything that is not you. You begin to shed the unnecessary, not through effort, but through recognition. Like mist burned away by the sun, illusion fades the moment it's seen for what it is. You realize that you were never the restless seeker trying to become something more. You were the space in which the seeking was happening. You were the quiet awareness watching the entire performance unfold. Once this begins to dawn in you, the world starts to feel lighter. You no longer walk through life as if it were a battlefield. You move as if life were music, unpredictable, fluid, alive. You begin to understand that harmony was never about control, but about listening. The same way a musician must surrender to the rhythm, you learn to trust the natural movement of your own existence. The mind, of course, will resist this. It will say, if I stop striving, I'll fall behind. If I stop controlling, everything will collapse. But this fear is built on misunderstanding. It assumes that you are the one holding life together. In truth, life is holding you. The same intelligence that turns stars, that breathes your lungs, that beats your heart without your permission, that is what's living you. To fight against it is to struggle against your own nature. When you allow life to flow through you rather than trying to command it, something miraculous happens. Effort becomes grace. Work becomes play. Even pain becomes a form of transformation. You begin to see that everything that once felt like punishment was only life trying to teach you how to let go. The world becomes your mirror. Wherever you look, you see reflections of the self you used to believe you were. But instead of reacting, you begin to smile. You realize that everyone is caught in the same dream, trying to protect the same illusions. And compassion arises not as an obligation, but as a natural understanding. You no longer need to change people. You see that they, too, are being guided home in their own time. There's a beautiful simplicity that returns to your existence. You no longer need grand philosophies or complex practices. Presence itself becomes your teacher. When you drink tea, you taste life in the tea. When you walk, you feel the ground as part of yourself. When you breathe, you realize the air entering your lungs has already belonged to countless others before you. Everything begins to shimmer with the same aliveness that once seemed hidden. You discover that joy was never something to achieve, it was what remained when striving stopped. The same world that once felt chaotic now feels sacred, because you are no longer separate from it. You are not a visitor in this universe. You are the universe momentarily playing the role of a person. Many people spend their whole lives trying to find meaning. They ask, why am I here? But the question itself is the confusion. You are not here to find meaning. You are here to experience being. Meaning is not something given to you by the world. It arises naturally when you are present. When you are fully here, life takes care of itself. You stop living in the past and future because you see how unreal they are. The past is memory, the future is imagination, and neither can ever be touched. The only place life actually exists is now. This moment, simple and ordinary as it may seem, contains everything. All the beauty, all the mystery, all the peace you were searching for has been waiting here all along. When you live from this awareness, even the so-called dangerous places lose their power. Comparison becomes gratitude because you finally see that everyone's path is their own. Control becomes surrender because you trust the intelligence behind every unfolding. Identity becomes play because you know you are not the mask but the one wearing it. Distraction turns into wonder because every sound and sight becomes a reminder of your own presence. Perfection becomes unnecessary because you realize that the world was never broken. Fear turns into curiosity because what once seemed threatening now becomes an invitation to awaken. And achievement becomes expression, a joyful way of participating in life, rather than a desperate attempt to justify your existence. When you live like this, there is no conflict between being and doing. You can act in the world without losing yourself in it. You can work, create, build, and care, but your peace no longer depends on results. You are free in success and free in failure, because both are seen as passing clouds in the same vast sky of awareness. People sometimes ask, if I stop chasing, won't I lose motivation? But true motivation doesn't come from fear or lack. It comes from love. When you love something, you do it naturally. You don't have to force yourself to create, to explore, to share. Life moves through you as inspiration, not obligation. That is what it means to live freely. And as you rest more deeply in that state, gratitude begins to bloom. You start to see the gift in everything, even in loss, even in uncertainty. Because you realize that life's impermanence is not a problem to be solved, but a miracle to be witnessed. Every ending makes room for another beginning. Every change reminds you that nothing was ever meant to be held forever. In that realization, the world no longer frightens you. You can stand in the middle of chaos and remain still inside. You can watch the rise and fall of fortune and not lose your balance. You can experience pain and not close your heart. This is the strength that arises from awakening, a strength that looks soft to the world but is unbreakable within. When the ego finally quiets, you discover that what remains is love. Not sentimental love, not the love that comes and goes, but the boundless love of awareness itself, the recognition that everything you see, everything you feel, is made of the same essence as you. And when you live from that realization, every encounter becomes sacred. Every person becomes a reflection of yourself. Every breath feels like a prayer. In the end, there is nowhere to go. No goal left to chase. No trap left to escape. You see that the whole journey was a circle leading you back to the present moment. Back to the simple truth that you are, and that is enough. Freedom was never about breaking chains, but about realizing they were never real. And when you finally see that, you smile. You smile because you understand what all the teachers, sages, and poets were trying to tell you. That the self you were trying so hard to find was the one that had been listening all along. You were never lost. You were simply dreaming. And now, you are awake. There comes a peculiar moment in one's life when joy simply vanishes. Not suddenly, like a door slamming shut, but gradually, like a room dimming without anyone touching the lights. You look around and everything is technically the same. The people you used to laugh with are still there. The hobbies you loved still exist. The world has not changed its shape. And yet, you feel as though something essential has slipped quietly out of your hands. You wake up and the day feels flat. You sit among things that used to spark curiosity and nothing happens. You listen to music that once made your chest bloom with feeling and it now passes through you like wind through an empty house. Conversations feel muffled. Activities feel distant. Even happiness feels like a memory someone else once told you. You begin to wonder, what's wrong with me? Why does nothing bring me joy anymore? This is perhaps one of the most frightening questions a human being can face, because it touches the deepest fear of all, the fear that something in you has broken. But what if the opposite is true? What if nothing brings you joy because something in you is finally working? You see, joy is not something you manufacture. It is something that arises naturally when you are aligned with your own life. It comes uninvited, like a bird singing on your windowsill. You don't have to force it, and you certainly don't have to chase it. Joy is the fragrance of a life lived from the center of oneself. So, when joy disappears, it is not because you have failed. It is because something in you is shifting. Something is dissolving. Something is releasing its grip. There is a phase of awakening that no one likes to talk about. A phase where the colors of life fade, the meaning drains out of your ambitions, and the things you once depended on for emotional nourishment no longer satisfy you. You feel empty, unmoved, disconnected, as though the world has stepped away from you. But what has really happened is that you have stepped away from the world you created before you understood yourself. The numbness you feel is not the death of joy. It is the death of stimulation, the death of distraction, the death of an identity that was built to cope, to perform, to impress, to survive. You cannot find joy because you are no longer resonating with the version of yourself that used to seek it. Now, this stage feels terribly confusing. You may think you are depressed, or apathetic, or emotionally dull, but numbness is not a malfunction. Numbness is a signal. It means your inner system is shutting down outdated pathways. It is refusing to sustain the old narrative. It is pulling you inward, away from noise and toward truth. Imagine you are holding a cup filled with muddy water. The more you swirl it, the murkier it becomes. But if you allow it to become still, the sediment sinks. Clarity emerges from quiet, not from motion. In the same way, your joy sinks when life is asking you to be still, not because joy is gone, but because clarity needs space to surface. The absence of emotion is not the beginning of despair. It is the beginning of purification. You see, the universe is remarkably intelligent, far more intelligent than the thinking mind. And when the life you have been living no longer matches the truth of who you are becoming, the universe does a very gentle thing. It withdraws your excitement for that life. It takes away your enthusiasm, your craving, your emotional reward system, not to punish you, but to guide you toward a larger horizon. You cannot stay in old rooms once your soul has outgrown them. But because humans fear stillness, you interpret this withdrawal as a problem. You chase joy harder, only to feel it slip further through your hands. You try to recreate old pleasures, revive old habits, repeat old patterns, but joy does not return, and the more you force, the more exhausted you become. You begin to ask, why can't I feel anything? But stillness is not nothingness. It is information. It is your inner being saying, you must stop now. You must listen. You must see what is really happening. The collapse of joy is the first sign that the old you is dissolving. The identity you built to survive your childhood, or to satisfy society, or to earn validation, or to keep yourself safe, its time has run out. And the dissolution of an identity always feels like the dissolution of feeling, because for a moment, you do not know who you are supposed to be. You are no longer the person you once were, but not yet the person you are becoming. This in-between space is emotionally quiet, and in the quiet, joy hides. Not because joy has left, but because it belongs to the self you are growing into, not the self you are shedding. Now, some people try to escape this phase. They try to feel something, anything, through distraction. They seek stimulation, drama, high highs, low lows, anything to convince themselves they are still alive. They fear the quiet because the quiet feels like emptiness. But emptiness is misunderstood. Emptiness is not the absence of life. It is the clearing of space for life to enter. It is the moment the soil is turned before new seeds are planted. You cannot grow anything on ground that is cluttered with old roots. So life uproots you. It empties you of old joy so that new joy can take root. This process is not comfortable, but it is necessary, because the joy you used to feel was not deep enough. It was joy based on external stimulation, joy based on identity, joy that depended on circumstances going your way, joy that could be taken from you. Life wants something more stable for you, something deeper, something that comes from within rather than from the world. And so it takes away the old joy, so you can discover a joy that rises from presence, not performance. And this transition is always prefaced by numbness. Before the heart can feel more, it must feel less. Before consciousness expands, it withdraws from the surface of things. Before the self awakens, it sleeps. This is why nothing brings you joy, because the part of you that used to chase joy is dissolving, and the part of you that will experience real joy has not yet fully awakened. Imagine a caterpillar. Before it becomes a butterfly, there is a moment when it is neither one nor the other. It dissolves entirely into a kind of living soup, a formless in-between. If it were capable of emotion, it might say, "Nothing feels meaningful anymore. I don't know what I am. I feel like nothing." But the caterpillar is not dying. It is reorganizing. You are reorganizing. The numbness is your cocoon. The emptiness is your metamorphosis. You are not losing joy. You are losing the version of yourself that required the world to provide it. And here is something even more subtle. The universe often removes joy when you have been living on borrowed energy, when you have been pushing yourself, ignoring yourself, betraying yourself in small ways, when you have been moving too fast for too long, When your nervous system is exhausted beyond what you can consciously admit. Sometimes nothing brings you joy because your body is simply tired, tired of enduring, tired of pretending, tired of performing optimism, tired of carrying the weight of expectations and emotional obligations, tired of trying to survive without rest. And so joy shuts down, not as a failure, but as protection. Your system cannot run on empty forever. It forces stillness when you refuse to give it willingly. This is why joylessness feels like being underwater. The world is muted because you are being asked to rest. You are being asked to face the quiet truth of your own exhaustion. Now, the mind resists this fiercely. It says, I shouldn't feel this way. I should be excited. I should be productive. I should be grateful. But the universe is not interested in your shoulds. It is only interested in your truth. And truth often arrives disguised as stillness, because only in stillness can you finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you. When joy collapses, meaning begins to loosen. The things that once held your identity together no longer feel solid. You begin to question who you are, what you want, what you believe, and why you have lived the way you have lived. This questioning is not a crisis, it is clarity. It is the beginning of authenticity. To awaken is to feel the collapse of borrowed meaning, the collapse of external joy, the collapse of the old self. To awaken is to pass through numbness on the way to truth. And here is the great paradox. Joy disappears because you are finally ready to feel real joy, not the joy of excitement, but the joy of being, not the joy of pleasure, but the joy of presence, not the joy of escape, but the joy of awareness. Real joy does not rise quickly. It rises slowly, like a tide. It rises from quiet, and before it rises, the shoreline must be cleared. This clearing is happening now. You are not broken. You are being prepared. You are not emotionally dead. You are emotionally resetting. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding yourself. The reason nothing brings you joy is because the old you can no longer be satisfied with the world that once comforted it. Your sensitivity is changing. Your awareness is deepening. Your soul is taking the steering wheel from your persona. And personas do not surrender joyfully. So the universe removes joy. It removes stimulation. It removes old meaning. It removes everything you used to lean on. And in that removal, you begin to stand on the ground of yourself for the first time. There is a point, usually after the numbness has lingered longer than you thought you could endure, when something almost imperceptible begins to shift. It does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with fireworks or dramatic emotion. It comes in the smallest way, so subtle that you nearly miss it. A moment where your breath feels slightly deeper. A moment where the world looks a touch less flat. A moment where a sound or a glimpse of light stirs something faint in your chest. It is not joy itself, but the space joy will return to. You see, before joy can return, the place inside you that receives joy has to be rebuilt. The old structure collapsed with your old identity, and you cannot feel joy through an identity that is dissolving. Joy cannot enter a house that is being rebuilt. The foundation must be cleared, the walls must be undone, the windows must be opened. This is the work that numbness does. Numbness is the renovation of the inner world. And once the renovation reaches a certain point, you begin to feel again. Not fully, not dramatically, but honestly. This is the first sign that you have entered the second phase of awakening, the phase where your emotional life begins to reorganize itself around presence rather than identity. You begin to sense that beneath the quiet, something is alive, something is breathing, something is waiting for you to slow down enough to notice it. You may wake up one morning and find that the silence feels less like emptiness and more like spaciousness. You may look at the sky and feel a faint recognition of beauty. not because the sky changed, but because your capacity to perceive it is returning. You may sit with yourself and feel a softness that was unavailable to you before. This is how the new joy approaches, not as excitement, but as gentleness, not as a high, but as a deepening. Joy begins to return as presence. Presence is the ability to inhabit your own life without the filter of expectation or fear. It is the ability to feel without interpreting, without managing, without controlling. Presence is the purest form of awareness. It is the ground of all real joy. Now, at first, this presence can feel unfamiliar. You are used to emotion arriving in waves, in highs and lows, in bursts of enthusiasm or disappointment. But presence brings a different flavor of experience. It is quieter, steadier, more patient. It does not intoxicate. It does not overwhelm. It simply reveals. And so joy shuts down, not as a failure, but as protection. Your system cannot run on empty forever. It forces stillness when you refuse to give it willingly. This is why joylessness feels like being underwater. The world is muted because you are being asked to rest. You are being asked to face the quiet truth of your own exhaustion. Now, the mind resists this fiercely. It says, I shouldn't feel this way. I should be excited. I should be productive. I should be grateful. But the universe is not interested in your shoulds. It is only interested in your truth. And truth often arrives disguised as stillness, because only in stillness can you finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you. When joy collapses, meaning begins to loosen. The things that once held your identity together no longer feel solid. You begin to question who you are, what you want, what you believe, and why you have lived the way you have lived. This questioning is not a crisis. It is clarity. It is the beginning of authenticity. To awaken is to feel the collapse of borrowed meaning, the collapse of external joy, the collapse of the old self. To awaken is to pass through numbness on the way to truth. And here is the great paradox. Joy disappears because you are finally ready to feel real joy, not the joy of excitement, but the joy of being, not the joy of pleasure, but the joy of presence, not the joy of escape, but the joy of awareness. Real joy does not rise quickly. It rises slowly, like a tide. It rises from quiet. And before it rises, the shoreline must be cleared. This clearing is happening now. You are not broken. You are being prepared. You are not emotionally dead. You are emotionally resetting. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding yourself. The reason nothing brings you joy is because the old you can no longer be satisfied with the world that once comforted it. Your sensitivity is changing. Your awareness is deepening. Your soul is taking the steering wheel from your persona. And personas do not surrender joyfully. So the universe removes joy. It removes stimulation. It removes old meaning. It removes everything you used to lean on. And in that removal, you begin to stand on the ground of yourself for the first time. There is a point, usually after the numbness has lingered longer than you thought you could endure, when something almost imperceptible begins to shift. It does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with fireworks or dramatic emotion. It comes in the smallest way, so subtle that you nearly miss it. A moment where your breath feels slightly deeper. A moment where the world looks a touch less flat. A moment where a sound or a glimpse of light stirs something faint in your chest. It is not joy itself, but the space joy will return to. You see, before joy can return, the place inside you that receives joy has to be rebuilt. The old structure collapsed with your old identity, and you cannot feel joy through an identity that is dissolving. Joy cannot enter a house that is being rebuilt. The foundation must be cleared, the walls must be undone, the windows must be opened. This is the work that numbness does. Numbness is the renovation of the inner world. And once the renovation reaches a certain point, you begin to feel again. Not fully, not dramatically, but honestly. This is the first sign that you have entered the second phase of awakening, the phase where your emotional life begins to reorganize itself around presence rather than identity. You begin to sense that beneath the quiet, something is alive, something is breathing, something is waiting for you to slow down enough to notice it. You may wake up one morning and find that the silence feels less like emptiness and more like spaciousness. You may look at the sky and feel a faint recognition of beauty, not because the sky changed, but because your capacity to perceive it is returning. You may sit with yourself and feel a softness that was unavailable to you before. This is how the new joy approaches, not as excitement, but as gentleness, not as a high, but as a deepening. Joy begins to return as presence. Presence is the ability to inhabit your own life without the filter of expectation or fear. It is the ability to feel without interpreting, without managing, without controlling. Presence is the purest form of awareness. It is the ground of all real joy. Now, at first, this presence can feel unfamiliar. You are used to emotion arriving in waves, in highs and lows, in bursts of enthusiasm or disappointment. But presence brings a different flavor of experience. It is quieter, steadier, more patient. It does not intoxicate. It does not overwhelm. It simply reveals. You begin to see that joy was never lost. It was simply waiting for you to return. The return of joy is the return of truth, the return of alignment, the return of the part of you that was buried beneath effort and identity. It does not matter how long you have been numb. It does not matter how deeply you believe something was wrong with you. Life has been reorganizing you in the dark, preparing you, softening you, bringing you to a place where joy can be recognized again, not as a burst of emotion, but as the quiet radiance of being awake. You see, joylessness is not the opposite of joy. It is the purification of joy. It is the space where old meanings dissolve so new ones can emerge. It is the silence before the deeper life begins. And now you stand at the threshold of that deeper life, a life in which you do not chase feeling, but allow feeling, a life where you do not grasp at joy, but recognize joy in everything, a life where you understand that joy is not something you find, but something you become. Because when the old you falls away, and the noise dissolves, and the numbness clears, you discover something astonishing. Joy was never in the world. It was always in your awareness of the world, and now that awareness is being restored. Not as it was before, but as something new, something deeper, something clearer, something truer. What returns now is not excitement. What returns now is not stimulation. What returns now is the simple miracle of being alive. This is the joy that cannot be taken from you. This is the joy that arises when you stop chasing and begin listening. This is the joy that emerges when you finally meet your life without resistance. This is the joy that was waiting for you in the silence. And now, because you have passed through the numbness, because you have been emptied, because you have surrendered the old identity, you can finally feel what was here all along. A joy that does not shout, a joy that does not vanish, a joy that does not depend on anything, a joy that simply is. This is the return. This is the rebirth. This is the beginning of a life lived from the center of yourself. And this is where joy begins. There are moments in life that seem to shimmer differently from all the others. You meet someone, and for reasons that defy logic, the air between you feels charged with something ancient. The conversation flows as if it has always been happening. The silences are full instead of awkward, and their presence feels less like discovery and more like remembrance. You can't quite explain it, but you know it. You know them, though you have never met. It isn't about attraction in the usual sense. It isn't even about similarity. It's something deeper, quieter, a kind of recognition that bypasses thought. You feel it in the way your body relaxes around them, the way your mind stops performing. In their gaze, you don't feel judged, but seen, not admired, but known. Most people mistake this feeling for romance, for destiny, for the long-awaited other half. But what you are really experiencing is the universe recognizing itself through two of its expressions. When two awakened souls meet, what passes between them is not ownership, but awareness. You see, awakening strips away the masks that most people wear. It dissolves the stories we tell ourselves about who we should be and how others should perceive us. And when those stories are gone, what's left is naked, being simple, luminous consciousness. So when two beings who are awake to that truth meet, they see not personas, but presence. The illusion of separation flickers and, for a moment, disappears. It's not that you fall in love, it's that love falls into you. Awakened connection is not built through effort. It happens by resonance. Just as two tuning forks vibrate together when one is struck, two beings who are attuned to life's depth naturally harmonize. They don't complete each other, they reveal each other. Each becomes a mirror in which the other can see what is already whole. The ego doesn't know what to do with this kind of meeting. It tries to name it, to contain it, to turn it into a narrative. It calls it fate or twin flame or cosmic purpose. But the truth is simpler and more mysterious than that. When you stand before another and feel that inexplicable recognition, you are witnessing consciousness remembering itself. There's a story I like to tell. A wave once looked across the ocean and saw another wave approaching. "You look familiar," it said. "Perhaps we've met before." The other wave laughed and said, "Of course we have. We've never been apart." That is what happens when two awakened souls meet. They see through the forms and remember the sea. At first, the experience can feel overwhelming. You may feel a rush of emotion, a sense of intensity that your mind can't label. That's because awareness, when reflected, amplifies itself. The presence of another conscious being draws forth what is dormant in you. You begin to see parts of yourself you had forgotten: tenderness, vulnerability, peace. This can be beautiful, but also unsettling. The ego fears transparency. It prefers the safety of roles and masks. When faced with someone who sees beyond them, it trembles. That trembling isn't a warning, it's a purification. It's life asking, are you willing to be seen completely? If you are, something miraculous unfolds. The boundaries soften, not in the sense of merging, but in the sense of openness. You realize that real intimacy is not about becoming one person. It's about realizing you were never two. That's the paradox of awakened connection. It deepens individuality while dissolving separation. Each person remains distinct, yet both recognize the same awareness behind the distinction. It's like two mirrors reflecting each other into infinity, endless, spacious, and free. In such presence, words become unnecessary. Conversation still happens, but it carries a different weight. Silence speaks louder than language. The need to impress fades. You start to listen, not to reply, but to hear the universe speaking through both of you. There's no desire to hold or keep the other, because what you value isn't their form, but their being. You see that even if the body's part, the awareness you share is continuous. That's why these connections, once experienced, never truly end. The people may move away, the story may change, but the recognition remains imprinted in consciousness. And so you begin to understand that what the universe brings together, it doesn't always keep together in form. It doesn't promise permanence, only truth. The purpose of meeting an awakened soul is not to possess them, but to remember who you are through them. When you grasp that, the anxiety of attachment dissolves. You no longer need to define the relationship, to protect it, to make it fit an image. You let it be what it is, a sacred intersection in the vast unfolding of being. Sometimes that intersection lasts a lifetime. Sometimes it lasts a moment. But in eternity, the length doesn't matter. 1 second of true recognition outweighs years of polite familiarity. And even if you never meet again, the meeting has already fulfilled its purpose. It has shown you the face of awareness in another form. It has reminded you that love, in its highest expression, is not about merging or clinging. It's about seeing clearly and allowing freely. You begin to notice that this recognition can happen anywhere, with a stranger on a train, a child, an animal, even a fleeting encounter that leaves no trace. It's the same universe winking at itself, saying, "I'm still here." In that realization, loneliness dissolves. You see that the awakened soul is not a rare being hidden somewhere in the world. Every person is that soul, sleeping or stirring, waiting for the right moment to open their eyes. And when they do, the meeting happens again, not between two people, but within the vastness that contains them both. When awareness meets awareness, something changes in the air. You can feel it, even if you can't explain it. There's a softness, as though time slows down just enough for eternity to peek through. You stop thinking about who you are supposed to be and simply exist as you are. It's not dramatic. It's not mystical fireworks. It's more like coming home to a place you never knew you'd left. And that homecoming doesn't depend on the other person. They may have sparked it, but what they really did was remind you of yourself. You begin to see that all love, in its deepest sense, is self-recognition. Not the small self that worries and strives, but the vast awareness that has always been quietly watching. When you love someone who is awake, you're really loving the presence that both of you share. This kind of meeting doesn't follow the usual human script. There are no guarantees, no promises to fulfill, no expectations to satisfy. You don't meet to complete each other, you meet to reflect each other. The relationship, whatever form it takes, becomes a sacred mirror. You start to see where you still cling, where you still hide, where you still confuse attachment for love. Sometimes that reflection can be uncomfortable. The other person may stir up parts of you that you thought were resolved. That's because awareness, by its nature, illuminates. When two awakened souls meet, every shadow is invited to surface, not for judgment, but for integration. It's like two candles placed near each other. Their flames grow brighter, and the darkness has no choice but to retreat. And yet, in that brightness, there is gentleness. True recognition doesn't demand, it doesn't need to control or claim. It simply allows. You can feel the difference. Possession feels heavy, while awareness feels weightless. When you look into the eyes of someone who truly sees you, there's no hunger in their gaze. There's space, the kind of space that lets you breathe freely, that invites you to be exactly as you are. You start to understand why the universe arranges such meetings. It's not to give you a perfect companion or to fix your loneliness. It's to remind you of the unity behind all appearances. Through the reflection of another, you remember that everything you seek has always been within you. That realization is both humbling and liberating. Because once you see it, you can never unsee it. The world starts to glow differently. Every encounter becomes an echo of that recognition. You begin to sense the sacred in everyone, even those who are still asleep to their own light. You look at them and think, "Ah, there you are, just not awake yet." And you realize how patient the universe really is. It allows every soul to awaken in its own time, through its own experiences, Some awaken through beauty, some through heartbreak, some through silence. But the destination is always the same, the rediscovery of being. When you understand that, love ceases to be personal, it expands. You no longer love people for who they are to you. You love them for what they are in truth, expressions of the same consciousness wearing different masks. The boundaries blur, and compassion becomes effortless. You stop needing to be understood, and instead, you start to understand. That's the strange and beautiful thing about awakening. It doesn't make you special. It makes you ordinary, but in the most miraculous way. You no longer stand apart from the world. You blend with it. You taste the oneness that mystics and poets have always tried to describe. And yet, you can still enjoy the play of individuality. You still laugh, cry, fall in love, and lose things. You still feel the human heartbeat, but now it pulses in rhythm with everything else. When you meet another awakened soul, that rhythm harmonizes for a while, like two notes in perfect tune, and when they part, the song continues in a different key. It's not about holding on, it's about listening. Listening to the music of connection without demanding it play forever. Some meetings are a single verse, others are an entire symphony. Both are complete, both are sacred. The universe has a peculiar way of arranging such encounters. You don't plan them, you don't predict them, and you certainly don't control them. They happen in the same way that flowers bloom or waves rise spontaneously, without permission. And just as naturally, they fade when the time is right. If you can accept that rhythm, you'll never feel abandoned. You'll understand that the universe doesn't take people away, it changes the form of the connection. The awareness you share remains untouched, like light passing through different windows. The glass changes, the light does not. And so, when two awakened souls meet, there's no need to grasp, no need to mourn, no need to define. You simply recognize the miracle, bow to it, and let it flow. That recognition is enough to transform your whole understanding of relationship. You see, that awakening isn't just a solitary journey, it's relational. Every meeting, every reflection, every exchange of energy is part of the unfolding. And through these reflections, awareness deepens its understanding of itself. Even separation in this light becomes sacred, because the moment you stop clinging, you start to perceive the subtle thread that connects all things. You realize that love never leaves, it only changes its language. So when you meet someone and feel that quiet recognition, don't rush to label it. Don't trap it in words like soulmate or destiny. Just be still and let it reveal its lesson. The universe is using that person as a mirror to show you your own depth. And when the reflection fades, thank it, bow to it, because it has done what it came to do, to remind you that awareness is never alone. That's the secret. The universe doesn't bring two awakened souls together to make them one. It brings them together so they can see that they always were. There is a quiet humor in the way the universe arranges things. It hides itself in countless forms, pretending not to know what it is. And then, every so often, two of those forms look at each other and remember. That remembrance is not dramatic. It's subtle, like sunlight finally reaching a corner of the room that's been in shadow all morning. You don't say, "Ah, the light has come." You simply notice that everything looks clearer. When two awakened souls meet, that clarity deepens. Each becomes a mirror in which the other can see the movement of awareness itself. The mirror does not add anything, it only reflects what is already there. But in the reflection, the mystery becomes visible. You begin to sense that what you call me and what you call you are two ripples on the same sea, two ways the universe is tasting its own existence. The mind resists this at first. It likes definitions. It wants to say, you are over there and I am over here, and our connection must mean something specific. But awareness smiles at the mind's confusion. It knows that what appears as two is actually one, playing hide and seek. The very act of seeking each other is how consciousness enjoys its own diversity. Think of a mirror facing another mirror. Between them, reflections multiply into infinity. No single image can claim to be the original, yet each one contains the same light. When you look into the eyes of another awakened being, you are seeing that infinity, an endless play of forms, revealing the same source. This realization changes the flavor of love. It becomes less like hunger and more like recognition. You don't reach out to take, you relax into seeing. Love stops being an effort and turns into awareness resting in itself. You no longer say, "I love you" as possession, but as observation. I see the same light moving there. And when you see that light clearly, judgment dissolves. The need to compare, to demand, to shape others into your image fades. How could you insist that another wave be higher or lower than yours when you both rise from the same ocean? Compassion becomes natural, not as a moral virtue, but as a direct understanding. The suffering of another is no longer foreign. It is your own reflection asking to be understood. Awakened relationship, then, is not about agreement or shared beliefs. It's about shared seeing. You could disagree entirely on politics, taste, or temperament, yet still feel the deep resonance that comes from recognizing the same ground of being. Beneath all the movement of personality, there is a stillness you both inhabit. When you rest there together, even silence becomes a conversation. That silence teaches you something that words cannot. Presence is enough. You realize that most of your interactions in life were attempts to fill silence because silence felt empty. But when awareness meets awareness, silence feels full. You could sit beside each other for hours, saying nothing, and still feel complete. It's as though time pauses to listen. People often ask, "How do I find someone awakened?" But that very question hides the answer. You cannot find awareness outside yourself. You can only recognize it. And recognition happens naturally when you're no longer seeking completion. When you stop demanding the world to fill your emptiness, you discover that everyone you meet becomes a potential reflection. The awakened companion may not appear as you imagine. They might be a stranger on a bus, a child, a teacher, or even a brief passerby. But the essence of the meeting is always the same: awareness glimpsing itself. Such meetings are gifts, not possessions. They are reminders, and like all reminders, they vanish once their purpose is fulfilled. To cling to them is to lose the lesson they carried. The universe will sometimes bring someone into your life only long enough for you to remember what you already are. When that memory settles, the person may drift away, and that is not a loss, it's a completion. Of course, the heart still aches when form departs. Even the awakened heart feels grief. But awareness transforms grief into gratitude. You begin to thank existence for lending you another mirror, even for a moment. You see that love is never wasted, because love was never between two. It was the movement of the one appearing as two. And so, the mirror of awareness does its work quietly. It shows you where you are still hiding. It reveals the subtle clinging to identity, the small fears that whisper, "I must hold on." But when you look closely, you see that even those fears are part of the dance. The mirror reflects everything, not only light but shadow, because both belong to wholeness. There will be times when another awakened soul challenges you, not through argument, but through presence. Their stillness might unsettle you. Their acceptance might disarm you. That is the mirror at work. Awareness is showing you the places where you still contract, where you still resist being seen. Let those reflections soften you instead of frighten you. The more completely you allow yourself to be seen, the freer you become. Over time, you notice that the need for particular mirrors fades. You no longer wait for the universe to bring you someone special because you've discovered that the mirror was never external. The world itself becomes your companion. Every sound, every face, every gust of wind reflects the same consciousness back to you. Life becomes an ongoing conversation between the infinite and itself. And in that realization, the old idea of loneliness loses its grip. You may live alone, you may walk through a crowded city, but you are never isolated. The same awareness that once met you through another now meets you through everything. The raindrop on the window, the laughter of a stranger, the breath moving in your chest, all of it whispers the same message. I am here, I am you, I have always been. When you live from that space, relationships transform. You don't enter them out of need, but out of joy. You meet others not to complete yourself, but to celebrate the shared being that already is complete. You can love fully without fear, because you know that even if form changes, the essence remains untouched. The mirror cannot break. It can only change what it reflects. This understanding also brings humility. You realize that awakening doesn't make you better than anyone else. It simply makes you transparent. You become a clear window through which life shines unobstructed. And when another soul looks through that window, they might recognize their own clarity. In that sense, awakening is contagious not because you teach it, but because you are it. Sometimes the universe arranges two such transparent beings to cross paths for a while. Their presence amplifies each other, creating a small field of peace that ripples outward. You can feel this when you're near them, a calm that doesn't need explanation. They don't preach, they simply exist, and their existence changes the atmosphere. But the universe is playful. It doesn't allow stagnation, even in enlightenment. Eventually, those paths diverge again. The mirrors move apart, and each continues, reflecting the infinite in new ways. And that, too, is perfect. When you understand this, you stop asking, will it last? Because you see that it already has. Every true meeting is eternal in its essence. The form may dissolve, but the awareness that recognized itself through that meeting never fades. In dreams, in memory, in subtle intuition, the resonance continues. It's the universe reminding you, nothing real can be lost. So, what happens when the universe brings two awakened souls together? Nothing and everything. On the surface, perhaps two people share a conversation, a walk, a moment of laughter. Beneath the surface, the infinite meets itself and smiles. The smile is enough. You might not even realize until later that something inside you shifted. The world feels lighter, your heart more spacious, your mind less defensive. That is how the mirror works quietly, without drama. It doesn't change what you are, it reveals it. And once revealed, you can never return to pretending. You may forget for a time, you may get caught again in stories and striving, but somewhere inside, the remembrance remains. Every future meeting, every glimpse of beauty, will echo that first recognition, I am the one I was seeking. Eventually, you stop distinguishing between spiritual and ordinary encounters. The sacred seeps into everything. The cashier's smile, the rhythm of rain, the breath between thoughts, all mirrors, all teachers. The universe never stopped bringing awareness together. You just stopped noticing. Now you see that the entire cosmos is an endless conversation between awakened souls, each reflecting the same light through different eyes. So, when another comes into your life and you feel that spark of familiarity, treat it as a blessing, not a mission. Don't rush to label it. Don't demand that it stay. Simply bow inwardly and say, ah, there you are again. Then let life decide how long the dance will last. Because the meeting itself is the message. To see yourself reflected so clearly, even for an instant, is to remember eternity. And in that remembrance, all seeking ends. You realize that there were never two awakened souls, only one awareness, meeting itself in infinite forms, smiling through countless eyes,